Today I'll teach you how to download Excel file from database in ASP.NET. So let's start. This is SQL Server Management Studio, and you can see the database script file which will be used to create the database and as well as the database table. So the next thing is to execute this SQL file. As you can see, the database has been created and also the table has been created. The table has 4 columns: ID, name, content type, data. ID will be the file ID, name is the name of file, content type is the content type of the file, which is Excel file. Data is the actual binary data. That's it from the database. Now I am moving to the Visual Studio, where first I'll add the connection string. So now the connection string is ready. Let's move to the ASPX page. So I'm adding a GridView control now. I am setting the auto generate columns property to false. Now I am adding columns to the GridView control. So here in the GridView, I have added bound field column for name and the template field column. And item template. Now I am adding a link button which will be required in order to download the file. I am adding an on-click event handler. Now here I'll be adding a hidden field which will hold the ID inside it. So now let's move to the code behind, where we'll write the code to populate the grid view. So here first I'm adding the namespaces. The first one is system.data.sql client, which will be used for AD.NET operations. The second one is system.configuration for accessing the connection string from the Web.Config file. Now I'm writing a function bindGrid, which will be used to populate the grid view. The next thing I am doing is reading the connection string from the Web.Config file. Then I have created the SQL connection object to which I am passing connection string. The next thing I am doing is creating the SQL command object. I am setting the SQL query which will be used to fetch the records from the table using SQL command object. The next thing I am setting the connection to SQL command object. Finally, execute reader function of the command class is assigned as data source to the grid view, and the data bind function of the grid view is called, and then close the connection. So here inside the page load event handler, I am adding the not is post back condition. Now here I'll be calling the bindGrid function. So now I am adding the event handler for download link button. The next thing I am doing is reading the ID from the hidden field using GridView row details. Now I am creating a variable of type byte array because I'll be reading the Excel file data. Now I am creating a variable of file name, and lastly content type. The next thing I am doing is reading the connection string from the Web.Config file. Then I have created the SQL connection object using the connection string. The next thing I'm doing is creating the SQL command object. I'm setting the SQL query which will be used to fetch the records from the table. I'm adding the ID parameters to the SQL command object. The next thing I'm setting the connection. Here I'm making use of SQL data reader to fetch the records from the database table. The SQL data reader is generated from execute reader function of the SQL command object. The next thing I am doing is reading data. The first one is byte array. The second one is content type. And lastly, file name. And then close the connection. Now we'll start the downloading process. We'll start by clearing the response, setting the buffer to true, char set to blank, cacheability to no cache, content type to the content type we have retrieved. Then I'll be setting the content disposition header, which will inform the browser that the file is an attachment. Now the file data from the database, that is the binary data, will be returned to the response using the binary write function. And finally, the response is flushed and the response is terminated. So with this, we complete our programming part, and now it's time to run our project and see it in action. So as you can see, the names of the file are being displayed, and also the download link is visible. And when I'm clicking on the download link, the file is being downloaded. So today we learned how to download Excel file from database in ASP.NET. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And please also click on the bell icon so that you receive notifications. Goodbye.